We are in the Columbia River. This is the largest river in the Pacific Northwest. It's also the largest river that flows into the Pacific Ocean. It's the fall season and we are surrounded by Chinook salmon, also called king salmon. These salmon are spawning and they're protecting their river nests. The fall river water is cold with a steady flow. We are near the river's edge in about 5 to 15 feet of water. There's a lot of activity under the water right now this time of the year, so let's go see what we can find. We are also under the water with other fish like giant white sturgeon. These fish are feeding on the fresh salmon eggs. The salmon have left the ocean. They have left the salt water to spawn in the freshwater river where their own life first began. We're several hundred miles away from the ocean. The Columbia River flows through the Pacific Northwest for about 1,200 miles. The river starts in Canada in the Rocky Mountains, and the river ultimately flows into the Pacific Ocean on the border of Washington and Oregon. Along the full length of the river, there are 14 man-made dams. Chinook salmon, or king salmon, are the largest species of Pacific salmon. These salmon range in a size from a couple of pounds to 20 pounds, but some can be over 50 pounds. In the past, there were Columbia River Chinook salmon that reached a size of over 100 pounds. The salmon here have swam hundreds of miles and traversed around 4 different dams. The salmon swim around the dams and up fish ladders, which are a series of pools that the fish use to bypass the dams. In the ocean, the salmon were a bright chrome. They lived in the salt water somewhere between 2 and 5 years. Of course, the longer the salmon live in the ocean, the bigger they get. These salmon spend their time in the ocean around the Bering Sea near Alaska, typically, where they feed on smaller fish and squid, other crustaceans. When the salmon return to the freshwater, they stop feeding. The salmon have been traveling up this river here for around 400 miles. The journey takes a few weeks to months. And when they're in the freshwater, these Chinook salmon undergo a physical transformation as they're spawning. The salmon lose their silver scales and they turn brown or red or green. Generally, the male salmon become a dark red. The female salmon are a little more red or brown, usually with a white underside. The big male salmon, they morph into more of a terrifying beast with scraggly teeth, a hooked upper jaw, and a hump on their back. We are also in the water with white sturgeon. These white sturgeon live throughout the Columbia River system. The sturgeon also live in the saltwater in the ocean. They can live from Alaska all the way down to the Baja Peninsula in Mexico. In the river, the sturgeon are typically in the deep water along the bottom. However, now the sturgeon are here in the shallow water to feed on the fresh salmon eggs. White sturgeon are the largest freshwater fish in North America. They can grow up to 20 feet long and weigh over 1,500 pounds. The sturgeon can also live for over 100 years. These sturgeon look big and scary, but they don't have teeth. They have more of a vacuum-shaped mouth that they can suck up the salmon eggs. These sturgeon also eat smaller fish, insects, crustaceans. The sturgeon have cartilage like a shark. They also have bony plates called scutes instead of scales. White sturgeon are often called living fossils as their lineage dates back over 200 million years. In this section of river, the fast-moving, well-oxygenated water with small rocks creates the perfect spawning ground for the Chinook salmon. The salmon are either wild or they were bred in a nearby fish hatchery. The wild fish will have their adipose fin intact. The hatchery fish generally have their adipose fin clipped at the time that they are released from the hatchery. The salmon almost always return to the exact same area in the river where they were born. This is an amazing feat to be able to navigate back to the precise water where they were born. Scientists believe salmon use their sense of smell and magnetism to identify the specific river they originated from. The salmon essentially have their own GPS system using the Earth's magnetic field. Not only do they know where they are when they're in the ocean, they know when they need to leave the ocean and start traveling back into the river in order to reach their spawning location at the correct time. The female salmon lays up to 15,000 eggs in a gravel nest or small rocks. These nests are called redds. The male then fertilizes the eggs. Next, the female salmon will cover the fertilized eggs with a layer of gravel or rocks to protect them from washing away down the river or from predators like the white sturgeon. The salmon lay so many eggs because the odds of survival are low. In fact, only about 15% of salmon eggs survive long enough to hatch. The eggs will hatch up to 20 weeks later in the spring. After the salmon hatch, they may take up to a year to swim all the way down the Columbia River back into the Pacific Ocean. After the eggs are fertilized and buried, the salmon will guard their nest until their eventual death. Oftentimes, there are several male and female salmon guarding the same redd together. There are even small salmon trailing behind the larger male and female salmon. The smaller salmon are called jacks if they're males or gills if they're females. Jacks and gills return to the freshwater for spawning after spending only 1 year in the ocean instead of the usual 2 to 5 years. Because they spend less time in the ocean, jacks are smaller in size compared to typical adult males. Despite their smaller size, jacks are still capable of spawning and contributing to the next generation. They often sneak past larger dominant males to fertilize eggs. Jacks and gills are an example of life history diversity, which increases the resilience of salmon populations. By maturing at different times and sizes, salmon populations can hedge against environmental variability, ensuring some fish reproduce even if conditions are unfavorable for others. The presence of jacks and gills can also be an indicator of future adult returns. The salmon diligently guard their nests until their ultimate demise. This may take a week or two. What a life. Spawn once and then die. Many of the salmon are already decaying. The white spots on the salmon are dying flesh. It is almost like they are living zombies. Salmon are called an apex or keystone species because their life cycle and ecological role significantly impacts a wide range of other species and other habitats. When the salmon die, their decaying bodies release nutrients enriching the soil and water. These nutrients brought by the salmon from the ocean to the forest or to the desert supports animals and plants growing in other ecosystems. Bears, eagles, wolves, otters, insects, they all eat the dying salmon. Salmon populations reflect the overall health of an aquatic ecosystem. The salmon's influence on the ecosystem, their role in the nutrient cycle, and their interconnectedness with countless species and habitats make them a cornerstone of the environments they inhabit. Historically, the Columbia River Basin produced an estimated 10 to 15 million salmon annually. The current population of returning salmon into the Columbia River is less than 10% of what it once was. It is important that we do what we can to help salmon populations return to healthy numbers. The salmon are important for our Earth to sustain a good life for all future generations. The salmon populations in the Columbia River have declined due to the numerous dams built along the river. The warmer water temperatures due to changes in the climate, reduced availability of food in the oceans, and also reduced habitat and habitat degradation from logging, agriculture, and urbanization near the river. Currently in Washington State, there are several methods to attempt to rehabilitate salmon populations, including habitat rehabilitation, removing invasive species, investments in clean water infrastructure, and addressing predatory species issues. Today, we have seen fall Chinook salmon spawning in the Columbia River. There are both wild and hatchery fish spawning together. There are also a lot of big white sturgeon enjoying a meal of salmon eggs. The salmon will spawn and then die, beginning a new circle of life for the new salmon in the spring. Thanks for watching.